Hello everyone, welcome to the channel. Before we begin today's victim story, I know it's annoying, but I need to ask for your support by subscribing to the channel here. I'm a new and small channel on YouTube, as you can see, and a simple click on the like button can help me a lot. So please subscribe to support me, click the like button and leave a comment telling me which city you're watching from. Now, let's get to the case. The early morning sun painted the San Diego coastline in hues of pink and gold as Jack Henderson made his way down to the docks. The salty breeze ruffled his graying hair, and he inhaled deeply, savoring the familiar scent of the sea. At 45, Jack's weathered face bore the marks of a lifetime spent on the water, each line and wrinkle a testament to his years as a fisherman. As he approached his boat, the Sea Whisper, Jack nodded to a few fellow fishermen preparing for their own day on the water. "Morning, Jack," called out Bill, a longtime friend and rival fisherman. "Looks like it's going to be a beautiful day out there." Jack raised a hand in greeting. "Sure does, Bill. Here's hoping the fish are biting." He stepped onto his boat, a 30-foot vessel that had been his loyal companion for the past 2 decades. Jack ran his calloused hand along the railing, feeling the smooth wood beneath his fingers. The Sea Whisper had seen him through countless trips, both good and bad, and he trusted her more than any other boat in the harbor. As he began his pre-launch routine, Jack's mind wandered to the events of the past week. His daughter Sarah had called to announce her engagement, and his son Mike had just landed a prestigious job in San Francisco. Jack felt a swell of pride, mixed with a tinge of melancholy. His children were growing up, moving on with their lives while he remained tethered to the sea and the only life he'd ever known. "How you're getting sentimental in your old age, Jackie boy," he muttered to himself as he checked his gear and supplies. Once everything was in order, Jack fired up the engine. The familiar rumble beneath his feet sent a thrill of excitement through him. No matter how many times he'd done this, the prospect of a day on the open water never failed to stir his soul. As he guided the Sea Whisper out of the harbor, Jack caught sight of a group of tourists gathered on the pier. They pointed excitedly at the boats heading out to sea, their cameras flashing in the early morning light. Jack couldn't help but smile at their enthusiasm. To them, this was a novelty, an adventure. To him, it was simply Tuesday. The coastline began to recede as Jack steered his boat towards his favorite fishing spot, about 10 miles offshore. The water was calm, with only a gentle swell that caused the Sea Whisper to rise and fall in a soothing rhythm. Seagulls wheeled overhead, their cries carried on the wind. Jack switched on his radio, tuning in to the local marine forecast. The crackling voice filled the cabin. "Good morning, San Diego. This is your 6 a.m. marine forecast. We're looking at clear skies and calm seas throughout the day, with winds from the northwest at 5 to 10 knots. Water temperature is holding steady at 68 degrees Fahrenheit. High tide will be at 2:17 p.m. It's shaping up to be a perfect day for fishing, folks. Remember to stay safe out there and report any unusual activity to the Coast Guard. This is NOAA. Weather radio signing off." "Sounds promising," Jack said to himself, switching off the radio. He'd been fishing these waters for over 3 decades, and while he respected the forecasts, he also trusted his own instincts. Today, everything felt right. The air, the sea, the sky, all were in perfect harmony. As he neared his destination, Jack began to prepare his gear. He checked his nets, making sure they were free of tangles and tears. His hands moved with the practiced efficiency of a man who had performed these tasks thousands of times before. Each knot, each piece of equipment was an extension of himself, as familiar as his own skin. Jack's mind drifted to the catch he hoped to make today. The local markets were always hungry for fresh fish, and a good haul could mean a comfortable week ahead. But more than that, it was about the satisfaction of a job well done, of providing for his family and community in the way he knew best. He thought of his wife, Maria, waiting for him back home. They'd been married for 25 years, and she understood his need to be out on the water better than anyone. In the early years of their marriage, she'd sometimes accompany him on his fishing trips, but as time went on and the children came along, her visits to the Sea Whisper became less frequent. Still, her presence was always with him, a comforting thought as he faced the vast expanse of the Pacific. As Jack cut the engine and allowed the boat to drift, he gazed out at the horizon. The sun was now fully above the waterline, turning the sea into a shimmering expanse of blue and gold. In the distance, he could see the spouts of whales migrating north, their massive forms breaching the surface before disappearing back into the depths. "All right, old girl," Jack said, patting the side of his boat. "Let's see what the sea has in store for us today." He moved to the stern, ready to cast his first net of the day. The weight of it in his hands was reassuring, a connection to generations of fishermen who had come before him. As he prepared to throw, Jack noticed a disturbance in the water about 50 yards out. A fin broke the surface, cutting through the waves with deadly grace. Jack's heart quickened. Shark sightings weren't uncommon in these waters, but they always commanded respect. He watched as the fin disappeared, then reappeared closer to the boat. From its size and shape, Jack guessed it was a Mako, fast, powerful, and potentially dangerous. For a moment, he considered moving to a different spot. But the pragmatic part of him, the part that had kept him alive and successful all these years, argued against it. The presence of a shark often meant there was a good school of fish nearby. If he was careful, he could still make his catch without putting himself in danger. "Just you and me out here, big fella," Jack murmured, his eyes scanning the water. "Let's both mind our own business, okay?" With a practiced motion, he cast his net into the sea. The weights at the edges pulled it down, and Jack began the patient process of waiting. The sun climbed higher in the sky, and the day grew warmer. Jack removed his jacket, draping it over the railing. Time seemed to slow down, as it often did, out on the water. Jack lost himself in the rhythm of the waves, the cry of the gulls, the occasional splash of a jumping fish. This was why he loved his job, despite its hardships and uncertainties. Out here he felt truly alive, truly himself. As the morning wore on, Jack's net began to feel heavy with the promise of a good catch. He grinned to himself, already anticipating the satisfaction of a full hold. But as he began to haul in the net, he felt an unusual resistance. Something big was caught in the mesh, something that thrashed and pulled with incredible strength. Jack's first thought was that he'd snagged a seal or perhaps a small dolphin. It wouldn't be the first time, and he was prepared to release whatever it was. But as he struggled with the net, his eyes widened in shock and fear. The sleek, powerful form of the Mako shark he'd seen earlier was now entangled in his net, its teeth gnashing at the ropes that held it captive. "Oh, Christ," Jack breathed, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew he had to act fast. A trapped shark was a dangerous shark, and every second it remained in the net increased the risk to both the animal and himself. With trembling hands, Jack reached for his knife. He'd have to cut away part of the net to free the shark, but it was a small price to pay for safety. As he leaned over the side of the boat, the shark's thrashing intensified. Its powerful tail sent sprays of water into the air, soaking Jack and making the deck treacherously slippery. "Easy, easy," Jack muttered, though he knew the shark couldn't understand him. He inched closer, knife at the ready. The shark's eye, black and unblinking, seemed to fix on him with primal intensity. In that moment, Jack felt the full weight of his vulnerability, a man alone on the vast ocean, face to face with one of nature's most perfect predators. As he prepared to make the first cut, Jack's mind raced with thoughts of his family, his life, all the things he still wanted to do and see. He took a deep breath, steadying himself. "Just a little closer," he whispered. "Just a little more and we'll both be on our way." The knife touched the first strand of the net, and Jack began to cut. The shark, sensing a change, renewed its struggles. Water churned around the boat, and Jack's world narrowed to the desperate task at hand. He was so focused on freeing the shark that he didn't notice how precariously he was leaning over the side of the Sea Whisper. As the last strand of the net gave way, Jack felt a momentary surge of relief. But in that split second of distraction, as the shark lunged forward to freedom, its powerful body collided with the side of the boat. The impact sent Jack off balance, and before he could catch himself, he toppled over the railing and into the churning water below. The shock of the cold water drove the breath from his lungs. Jack surfaced, gasping, his eyes wide with terror, as he searched for any sign of the shark. The Sea Whisper bobbed nearby, tantalizingly close yet impossibly far in that moment of panic. As Jack treaded water, His heart pounding in his ears, he caught a flash of movement beneath the surface. The shark, freed from the net but still in a frenzy, was circling back towards him. In that moment, as the fin broke the surface once more, Jack Henderson realized that his routine day of fishing had just turned into a desperate fight for survival. Jack's heart raced as he treaded water, his eyes darting frantically across the surface for any sign of the Mako shark. The gentle lapping of waves against his body seemed to mock the danger lurking beneath. He could see his boat, the Sea Whisper, bobbing just 30 feet away, but it might as well have been miles in his current predicament. Stay calm, he muttered to himself, trying to control his breathing. Jack knew that panic was as much an enemy as the shark in this situation. He'd spent his life on these waters, and now every bit of knowledge he'd accumulated over the years would be put to the test. A flash of movement caught his eye, and Jack's breath hitched in his throat. The shark's dorsal fin sliced through the water about 20 yards away, circling back towards him. The Mako's size was even more apparent now that Jack was in the water with it. Easily 12 feet long and built for speed and power. Jack began to swim towards his boat, his strokes measured and deliberate. He knew that thrashing about would only attract more attention from the predator. Every few seconds he'd pause to look around, his heart pounding so hard he could feel it in his temples. The fin disappeared beneath the surface, and Jack felt a new wave of terror wash over him. Not being able to see the shark was almost worse than watching it approach. His imagination ran wild with images of the massive creature surging up from the depths, jaws wide open. As he neared the Sea Whisper, Jack allowed himself a glimmer of hope. If he could just reach the ladder at the stern, he'd be safe. But that hope was shattered as he felt a sudden, powerful current of water rush past him. The Mako shot by, missing Jack by mere inches. Its rough skin grazed his leg, and he let out an involuntary yelp of fear. The shark had made a pass at him, likely investigating this new presence in its territory. Oh God, Jack gasped, adrenaline surging through his veins. He knew the next pass might not be so innocuous. Makos were known for their aggressive behavior, and were responsible for numerous attacks on humans over the years. Jack redoubled his efforts to reach the boat, his arms burning with exertion. He was only 10 feet away now, but those 10 feet seemed like an insurmountable distance with an apex predator circling him. Suddenly, the water around Jack erupted. The Mako had circled back and was now charging directly at him. Time seemed to slow down as Jack saw the shark's mouth open, rows of razor-sharp teeth gleaming in the sunlight. In that moment, Jack's survival instincts kicked in. He remembered an old fisherman's tale about sharks being sensitive around their snouts. With no other option, he balled his fist and, as the Mako lunged at him, struck out as hard as he could. By some miracle, his fist connected with the shark's nose. The impact sent a jolt of pain up Jack's arm, but it had the desired effect. The Mako veered off at the last second, its powerful body brushing past Jack and creating a wake that nearly pulled him under. Gasping and sputtering, Jack used the last reserves of his strength to propel himself towards the boat. His fingers grasped the metal rungs of the ladder, and he hauled himself up and over the side, collapsing onto the deck in a heap. For several long moments Jack lay there, his chest heaving as he gulped in air. The sound of his own ragged breathing was deafening in his ears. Slowly, on shaking arms, he pushed himself up and crawled to the side of the boat. The Mako was still there, its fin cutting lazy circles in the water. It seemed almost as if it was waiting, hoping its prey might fall back in. Jack shuddered, realizing how close he'd come to becoming another statistic, another tragic headline about a fisherman taken by the sea. As his breathing began to slow, and the initial shock wore off, Jack became aware of a stinging sensation on his leg. Looking down, he saw several long scratches where the shark's rough skin had grazed him. They weren't deep, but they were a stark reminder of his brush with death. Jack's hands shook as he reached for the radio. He needed to report this incident, not just for his own safety, but for anyone else who might be out on the water today. As he picked up the receiver, he paused, suddenly overwhelmed by the reality of what had just happened. This is the Sea Whisper calling San Diego Coast Guard," he said, his voice trembling. "I need to report a shark encounter about 10 miles off the coast." There was a crackle of static, then a clear voice responded. This is Coast Guard San Diego. Can you provide more details about your location and the nature of the encounter? Jack gave them his coordinates and a brief description of what had happened. The Coast Guard officer on the other end remained calm and professional, but Jack could hear the concern in his voice. We're dispatching a patrol boat to your location, Sea Whisper. They should reach you in about 30 minutes. In the meantime, stay on your vessel and keep an eye out for any further shark activity. Are you injured? Do you require medical assistance? Jack looked down at his leg. The scratches were still bleeding slightly, but it was nothing serious. No, I'm okay. Just a few scratches. I'll be fine until your team gets here. Understood, Sea Whisper. We'll stay in radio contact. Let us know immediately if anything changes. As Jack set down the radio, he felt a wave of exhaustion wash over him. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving him feeling drained and shaky. He slumped down against the cabin wall, his eyes fixed on the water where the Mako still patrolled. Time seemed to stretch as Jack waited for the Coast Guard to arrive. Every splash, every shadow in the water made him flinch. He found himself replaying the attack in his mind, wondering if he could have done anything differently. Should he have moved to a different spot when he first saw the shark? Should he have been more careful while freeing it from the net? His thoughts were interrupted by the distant sound of an engine. Looking up, he saw a Coast Guard patrol boat, approaching, its blue lights flashing. Relief flooded through him at the sight. As the patrol boat pulled alongside the Sea Whisper, Jack saw two officers on deck, their faces etched with concern. One of them, a young woman with short blonde hair, called out to him, "Mr. Henderson, I'm Officer Sarah Martinez. Are you all right?" Jack nodded, attempting a weak smile. "Yeah, I'm okay. Just a bit shaken up." Officer Martinez and her partner, the tall man introduced as Officer Tom Baker, boarded the Sea Whisper. They quickly assessed Jack's condition, cleaning and bandaging the scratches on his leg. "You're lucky, Mr. Henderson," Officer Baker said as he worked. "Mako encounters like this are rare, but they can be extremely dangerous. You did the right thing by defending yourself and getting back to your boat as quickly as possible." Jack nodded, still feeling somewhat numb. "I've been fishing these waters for over 30 years, he said quietly. "Never had anything like this happen before." Officer Martinez was scanning the water, her brow furrowed. "I don't see any sign of the shark now. It's likely moved on to deeper waters. Still, we'll put out an alert to other boats in the area." As the officers finished treating his wounds and taking his statement, Jack found himself staring out at the ocean. The water was calm now, sparkling under the midday sun, as if nothing had happened. It was hard to reconcile the beauty and peace of the scene with the terror he'd experienced just an hour ago. "Mr. Henderson," Officer Martinez said gently, pulling him from his thoughts, "we'd like to escort you back to the harbor. You've been through a traumatic experience, and it would be best if you didn't stay out here alone." Jack wanted to protest. He was a seasoned fisherman, after all, and the idea of being escorted back to shore like some rookie felt wrong. But as he looked at the concern in the officer's eyes, he realized that this wasn't just about him. His experience could help protect others. "All right," he agreed, nodding slowly. "I appreciate that." As Jack started up the Sea Whisper's engine, he felt a mix of emotions swirling inside him. There was relief, certainly, at having survived, but there was also a newfound respect, and yes, fear for the ocean he'd thought he knew so well. As they began the journey back to shore, Jack couldn't help but wonder if he'd ever look at these waters the same way again. The Coast Guard boat flanked the Sea Whisper as they made their way back to the harbor. Jack's hands were steady on the wheel, but his mind was far from calm. He kept replaying the attack in his head, the image of the Mako's open jaws seared into his memory. As the San Diego coastline came into view, Jack felt a sudden, overwhelming urge to be home. He wanted to hold his wife, to hear his children's voices, to feel the solid ground beneath his feet. The Sea Whisper, his faithful companion for so many years, now felt like a fragile shell against the vast, unpredictable ocean. When they finally docked, Jack saw a small crowd gathered on the pier. Word of the shark encounter had spread quickly. He could see the mixture of concern and curiosity on their faces as he stepped off his boat. Among the onlookers, Jack spotted a familiar face, Bill, his fellow fisherman from that morning. Bill pushed through the crowd, his weathered face creased with worry. "Jack, thank God you're all right," Bill said, clasping Jack's shoulder. "When I heard about the shark attack, I feared the worst." Jack managed a weak smile. "It was close, Bill. Too damn close." As the Coast Guard officers spoke with harbor officials and curious bystanders, peppered Jack with questions, he found himself longing for the quiet of his home. The adrenaline had long since worn off, leaving him feeling drained and overwhelmed. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity of recounting his experience and assuring everyone he was okay, Jack was allowed to leave. As he walked away from the docks, he turned back for one last look at the Sea Whisper. The boat sat peacefully, in its berth, giving no hint of the terror it had witnessed that day. Jack knew that tomorrow he'd have to decide whether to go back out on the water. But for now, all he wanted was to go home, to feel safe, and to try to make sense of the day. That had almost cost him everything. The following days passed in a blur for Jack Henderson. His encounter with the Mako shark had left him shaken to his core, and he found himself struggling to regain his footing in a world that suddenly seemed fraught with unseen dangers. The morning after the incident, Jack woke early, his body still, on its fisherman's schedule despite the trauma of the previous day. He lay in bed, listening to the soft breathing of his wife Maria beside him, and stared at the ceiling. The memory of the shark's cold black eye and rows of razor-sharp teeth flashed through his mind, causing him to shudder involuntarily. Maria stirred, sensing his unease. She turned to face him, her eyes full of concern. "Jack, are you okay?" He forced a smile, not wanting to worry her further. "I'm fine, just thinking." She propped herself up on one elbow, studying his face. "You don't have to pretend with me. Jack, what happened yesterday? It's okay to be shaken up." Jack sighed, running a hand through his graying hair. I know, it's just... I've been on those waters my entire life, Maria. I thought I knew every danger, every risk, but yesterday..." He trailed off, struggling to find the words. Maria reached out, taking his hand in hers. "You don't have to go back out there, right? Away, you know. No one would blame you if you took some time." The thought of not returning to the sea filled Jack with a mixture of relief and shame. He was a fisherman. It was all he'd ever known. But the idea of facing those waters again, of feeling that vulnerability, it terrified him in a way he'd never experienced before. "I don't know what to do," he admitted quietly. Maria squeezed his hand. "You don't have to decide anything right now. Let's just take it one day at a time, okay?" Jack nodded, grateful for her understanding. As they got up to start their day, he couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted in his world. Over breakfast, Jack's phone buzzed, incessantly with messages and calls from friends, fellow fishermen, and even local news outlets wanting to hear his story. He ignored most of them, not ready to relive the experience for an eager audience. As he sipped his coffee, staring out the kitchen window at the distant ocean, his daughter Sarah called. Her voice was filled with a mixture of relief and lingering. "Fia? Dad, I just heard what happened. Are you okay? Why didn't you call us right away?" Jack felt a pang of guilt. In the chaos following the incident, he'd forgotten to reach out to his children. "I'm sorry, sweetheart. It was a crazy day. I'm fine, really. Just a few scratches." "A few scratches?" Sarah's voice rose in pitch. "Dad, you were attacked by a shark. That's not just a few scratches." "I wasn't attacked exactly," Jack tried to explain. "It was more of an encounter. I got lucky." There was a pause on the other end of the line. When Sarah spoke again, her voice was quieter, more controlled. "Dad, please tell me you're not thinking of going back out there." The question hung in the air, and Jack found himself at a loss for words. It was the same question he'd been grappling with since the incident. "I don't know, Sarah. I honestly don't know," after reassuring his daughter and promising to keep her. Updated, Jack ended the call. He sat at the kitchen table, feeling the weight of uncertainty pressing down on him. The sea had been his life, his livelihood, his passion. Could he really walk away from it? Later that morning, a knock at the door roused Jack from his thoughts. He opened it to find Bill standing there, a six-pack of beer in one hand and a concerned look on his face. "Thought you might need this," Bill said, holding up the beer. "And maybe someone to talk to who understands." Jack nodded, grateful for his friend's presence. They settled on the back porch, overlooking the distant shoreline. For a while they sat in companionable silence, sipping their beers and watching the waves roll in. Finally, Bill spoke. "You gonna tell me what really happened out there, Jack?" Jack took a long pull from his beer before answering. "It was like nothing I've ever experienced, Bill. One minute I was trying to free the shark from my net. The next I was in the water with it. I've never felt so helpless." Bill nodded, his eyes fixed on the horizon. "I can't even imagine. We all know the risks when we go out there, but to actually face something like that, that's just it," Jack said, his voice tight with emotion. "I always thought I was prepared for anything the sea could throw at me. But yesterday, it was like I was seeing it for the first time, realizing how small and vulnerable we really are out there." Bill turned to look at his friend, his expression serious. "So what are you going to do? You thinking of hanging up your nets?" The question hit Jack like a physical blow. He'd been avoiding thinking about it directly, but now, faced with his friend's blunt inquiry, he couldn't escape it any longer. "I don't know, Bill. The thought of going back out there, it terrifies me. But the thought of never going back—" He shook his head, unable to finish the sentence. Bill placed a hand on Jack's shoulder. "Listen, Jack, you're one of the best fishermen I know. You've got salt water in your veins. But what happened to you yesterday, that's not something you just shake off. Take some time. The sea will still be there when you're ready." As the day wore on, Jack found himself restless. The walls of his house seemed to close in on him, and he felt an irresistible pull towards the shore. Without really thinking about it, he found himself walking down to the beach, his feet sinking into the warm sand. He stood at the water's edge, letting the gentle waves wash over his feet. The ocean stretched out before him, vast and beautiful, and terrifying all at once. Jack closed his eyes, feeling the sea breeze on his face, listening to the cries of the gulls overhead. In that moment, he realized that regardless of his fear, regardless of the trauma he'd experienced, the sea was a part of him. It had shaped his life, defined who he was. Walking away from it completely wasn't an option, but neither could he simply pretend that nothing had changed. The encounter with the Mako had shown him a side of the ocean he'd never truly acknowledged before, and he knew he could never look at those waters the same way again. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, Jack made his decision. He would return to the sea, but not right away. He needed time to process what had happened, to regain his confidence and to learn from this experience. Walking back home, Jack felt a sense of peace settling over him for the first time since the incident. The road ahead would be challenging, but he was a fisherman born and bred. He would face his fears, respect the power of the ocean, and find a way to reconcile the terror of that day with his love for the sea. Entering his house, he found Maria waiting for him, a questioning look on her face. Jack took her hands in his, meeting her gaze steadily. "I'm going back," he said quietly. "Not tomorrow, not next week, but when I'm ready. The sea is a part of me, Maria. I can't turn my back on it even after what happened." Maria nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. She knew her husband well enough to understand that this decision had not come easily. "I know," she said softly. "Just promise me you'll be careful. Promise me you'll come home." Jack pulled her into a tight embrace, feeling the strength of her love supporting him. "I promise," he whispered. As night fell over San Diego, Jack Henderson stood by his bedroom window, looking out at the darkened ocean. The memory of the Mako's attack was still vivid in his mind, but now it was tempered with a newfound respect for the sea and all its creatures. He knew that when he eventually returned to those waters, he would do so with greater wisdom, caution, and appreciation for the delicate balance between man and nature. The path forward would not be easy, but Jack was determined to face it head-on. He was a fisherman, after all, and the call of the sea was not something he could ignore. With time, he would find a way to reconcile his fear with his passion, to honor both the terror and the beauty of the ocean that had shaped his life. As he turned away from the window, Jack felt a sense of purpose settling over him. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new fears to face. But for now he was home, safe with his family, carrying within him the indelible memory of his encounter with one of nature's most perfect predators. It was a memory that would shape the rest of his life, a constant reminder of the power and mystery of the sea he loved. Days turned into weeks. and Jack Henderson found himself slowly regaining his equilibrium. The nightmares that had plagued him in the immediate aftermath of the shark encounter began to fade, replaced by a gnawing sense of restlessness. He spent his days helping Maria around the house, fixing things that had long been neglected, but his eyes constantly drifted to the horizon, to the sea that both called and terrified him. One morning, as Jack sat on his porch nursing a cup of coffee, he saw Bill's truck pull up in front of his house. His old friend climbed out, a determined look on his weathered face. "Morning, Jack," Bill called as he approached. "Thought I might find you out here." Jack nodded in greeting, gesturing for Bill to take a seat. "What brings you by so early?" Bill settled into the chair next to Jack, his eyes fixed on the distant shoreline. "Been thinking about you, buddy. It's been almost a month now. Folks down at the docks are starting to wonder if you're ever coming back." Jack felt a familiar tightness in his chest at the mention of returning to the sea. "I don't know, Bill. I'm not sure I'm ready." Bill turned to face his friend, his expression serious. "Listen, Jack, I've got a proposition for you. I'm heading out today, just a short trip. Why don't you come with me? No pressure to do anything, just be on the water again." Jack's first instinct was to refuse, but something stopped him. The idea of being on a boat again, feeling the sway of the waves beneath his feet, stirred a longing he'd been trying to ignore. "I don't know, Bill," he said hesitantly. What if I freeze up out there?" Bill placed a reassuring hand on Jack's shoulder. "That's why I'll be there. We'll take it slow, stay close to shore. What do you say?" After a long moment, Jack nodded slowly. "All right. Let me talk to Maria first." An hour later, Jack found himself standing on the dock staring at Bill's boat, the sea breeze. His heart was racing and his palms were sweaty, but beneath the fear was a spark of excitement he couldn't deny. Maria stood beside him, her hand clasped tightly in his. "You don't have to do this if you're not ready, Jack," she said softly. Jack turned to her, managing a small smile. "I know, but I think I need to. I can't let that one day define the rest of my life." With a deep breath, Jack kissed Maria goodbye and stepped onto the boat. Bill was already at the helm, his experienced hands guiding the sea breeze out of the harbor. As they cleared the breakwater and entered open water, Jack felt a mixture of fear and exhilaration wash over him. The familiar scent of salt air filled his lungs, and he found himself instinctively bracing against the gentle roll of the waves. "How you doing, Jack?" Bill called over the sound of the engine. Jack nodded, his knuckles white as he gripped the railing. "I'm okay. Just taking it in." They cruised for about an hour, staying within sight of the coastline. Jack gradually began to relax, the rhythmic motion of the boat and the endless expanse of the ocean working their familiar magic on him. As Bill cut the engine, allowing the boat to drift, Jack found himself moving to the stern, his eyes scanning the water. There was no sign of any sharks, just the gentle lapping of waves against the hull. "You want to try casting a line?" Bill asked, holding out a fishing rod. Jack hesitated for a moment before taking the rod. The weight of it in his hands felt right, like reuniting with an old friend. With practiced ease, he baited the hook and cast it out into the water. As they fished in companionable silence, Jack felt some of the tension he'd been carrying for weeks begin to ebb away. The ocean, which had seemed so menacing in his memories and nightmares, now appeared as it always had, vast, beautiful, and full of life. Suddenly, Jack's line went taut. "I've got something," he called out, excitement overriding his lingering fear. Bill moved to his side, ready to assist if needed. "Bring it in, Jack." Jack began to reel, feeling the familiar struggle of a fish on the line. For a moment, he was transported back to countless days spent doing this very thing, the thrill of the catch coursing through him. As he pulled the fish, a respectable-sized bass, over the side of the boat, Jack felt a smile spread across his face. It was the first genuine smile he'd had in weeks. "Nice catch, buddy," Bill said, clapping him on the back. Jack looked at the fish flopping on the deck, then out at the ocean. "You know, Bill," he said slowly, "I think I might be ready to take the Sea Whisper out again." Bill's face broke into a grin. "That's what I like to hear, but let's not rush it. Maybe we can do this again a few more times, get you fully back." In the groove. As they headed back to the harbor, Jack felt a sense of peace settling over him. The ocean still held dangers. He knew that now more than ever. But it was also a source of life, of livelihood, of joy. He couldn't turn his back on it, no matter how frightening his experience had been. Over the next few weeks, Jack went out. With Bill several more times. Each trip lasted a little longer, ventured a little farther from shore. The nightmares that had plagued him began to fade, replaced by the familiar dreams of the sea that had been his companions for decades. Finally, on a crisp morning 6 weeks after his encounter with the Mako, Jack stood on the dock next to the Sea Whisper. His old boat had been patiently waiting for him, and as he ran his hand along her hull, he felt a surge of emotion. Maria stood beside him, worry and pride warring in her eyes. "Are you sure about this, Jack?" He turned to her, taking her hands in his. "I'm sure. I can't hide from it forever, Maria. The sea, it's a part of me. Always has been, always will be." She nodded, blinking back tears. "I know, just be careful out there, come back to me." Jack pulled her into a tight embrace. "Always," he whispered. As he prepared to cast off, Jack saw a small crowd gathering on the dock. Word had spread that he was going back out, and it seemed like half the fishing community had turned up to see him off. Bill pushed through the crowd, a broad smile on his face. "Thought you might need this," he said, handing Jack a small object. Jack looked down to see a shark tooth on a leather cord, a talisman of sorts. He laughed, shaking his head. "Thanks, Bill, for everything." With a final wave to the crowd, Jack started the Sea Whisper's engine. As he guided her out of the harbor, he felt a familiar sense of calm settle over him. The ocean stretched out. Before him, a canvas of blue beneath the morning sky. Jack knew that the memory of the Mako would always be with him. He would never again take the sea for granted or underestimate its power. But as he felt the spray on his face and the gentle roll of the waves beneath his boat, he also knew that this was where he belonged. Hours later, as the sun began to dip towards the horizon, Jack turned the Sea Whisper back towards home. His hold was full of fish, a good day's catch by any standard. But more importantly, he had faced his fears and found that the love for his chosen life was stronger than the terror of that one harrowing day. As the coast of San Diego came into view, Jack felt a profound sense of gratitude for the sea that had shaped his life, for the friends and family who had supported him through his darkest days, and for the strength he had found within himself to come back to the place he loved most. The Sea Whisper glided into her berth, and Jack saw Maria waiting for him on the dock, her face a mixture of relief and joy. As he stepped off the boat, he pulled her into his arms, breathing in the scent of her hair mingled with the salt air. "Welcome home, Jack," she whispered. And he was home in every sense of the word. The sea, with all its beauty and danger, would always be a part of him. Jack Henderson, fisherman, husband, father, and survivor, was back where he belonged. The sun had barely crested the horizon when Jack Henderson stepped onto the deck of the Sea Whisper. The familiar creak of wood under his feet and the gentle sway of the boat felt like a homecoming. It had been 3 months since his encounter with the Mako shark, and while the memory still sent a chill down his spine, Jack had found his way back to the sea that was as much a part of him as his own blood. As he began his pre-launch routine, checking equipment and supplies with practiced ease, Jack heard footsteps on the dock. He looked up to see Maria approaching, a thermos in her hand and concern etched on her face. "I thought you might need this," she said, handing him the thermos. The rich aroma of fresh coffee wafted up, mingling with the salty sea air. Jack took it gratefully, his calloused hands wrapping around the warm container. "Thanks, love. You didn't have to come down here so early." Maria's eyes searched his face, looking for any sign of doubt or fear. "I wanted to see you off. Are you sure about this, Jack? Going out alone?" He nodded, understanding her concern. Since his return to fishing, he'd always gone out with Bill or one of the other local fishermen. This would be his first solo trip. "Since the incident, I'm sure," he said, his voice steady. "It's time. I need to do this." Maria nodded, blinking back tears. She reached up, touching the shark-tooth necklace that now hung permanently around Jack's neck. "Just be careful out there, and come back to me." Jack pulled her into a tight embrace, breathing in the scent of her hair. "Always," he whispered. As Maria stepped back onto the dock, Jack started the engine. The familiar rumble beneath his feet sent a thrill through him. part excitement, part lingering apprehension. He guided the Sea Whisper out of the harbor, feeling the tension in his shoulders begin to ease as the coastline receded behind him. The day was perfect for fishing. Clear skies, calm seas, and a light breeze that carried the promise of good weather. Jack set course for his favorite fishing grounds about 10 miles offshore. As he traveled, he found himself constantly scanning the water, his eyes alert for any sign of a dorsal fin breaking the surface. "Get a grip, Henderson," he muttered to himself. "You can't spend the rest of your life jumping at shadows." When he reached his destination, Jack cut the engine and allowed the boat to drift. The silence was profound, broken only by the gentle lapping of waves against the hull and the occasional cry of a seagull. He took a deep breath, savoring the moment. As he prepared his gear, Jack's mind wandered to the countless times he'd performed these same actions over the years. The muscle memory was still there, his hands moving with practiced efficiency as he baited hooks and checked his nets. The first few hours passed uneventfully. Jack's catch was decent, nothing spectacular but enough to make the trip worthwhile. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, he found himself relaxing, falling into the familiar rhythm of life at sea. It was just past noon when Jack noticed a change in the water. A school of smaller fish was darting about erratically, a sure sign that a predator was nearby. His heart rate quickened as he scanned the surrounding sea, half expecting to see the sleek form of a shark cutting through the waves. Instead, he spotted the unmistakable dark shape of a pod of dolphins, their dorsal fins breaking the surface as they chased their prey. Jack let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding, chuckling at his own nervousness. "Jumpy as a greenhorn," he said aloud, shaking his head. As he watched the dolphins at play, a memory surfaced, not of the shark attack but of a day long ago when he'd first started fishing with his father. They'd encountered a similar pod of dolphins, and Jack, barely 10 years old at the time, had been mesmerized by their grace and beauty. His father's words came back to him now, as clear as if they'd been spoken yesterday. "Remember, Jack, the sea gives and the sea takes. Our job is to respect it, learn from it, and never take it for granted." Jack touched the shark tooth at his neck, a talisman that now represented both the dangers and the wonders of the ocean. He realized that his father's words held even more meaning now, after all he'd been through. As the afternoon wore on, Jack's catch continued to improve. He was so focused on his work that he almost didn't notice the change in the weather. A bank of dark clouds had appeared on the horizon, moving quickly in his direction. Jack frowned, checking his watch. The forecast hadn't mentioned any storms, but he knew all too well how quickly conditions could change at sea. He began to gather his gear, preparing to head back to shore. The wind picked up as he stowed the last of his equipment, causing the Sea Whisper to rock more violently. Jack could smell rain in the air and hear the distant rumble of thunder. His hands moved quickly, expertly, as he prepared the boat for the journey home. As he turned the bow towards San Diego, the first fat drops of rain began to fall. Within minutes it had become a deluge, reducing visibility and turning the once calm sea into a churning mass of white-capped waves. Jack gripped the wheel tightly, his eyes straining to see through the curtain of rain. The Sea Whisper pitched and rolled beneath him, but he held her steady, his years of experience guiding his every move. A flash of lightning illuminated the sky, followed almost immediately by a deafening crack of thunder. Jack flinched involuntarily, his mind flashing back to the moment the Mako had lunged at him. He forced the memory away, focusing instead on the task at hand. "Come on, old girl," he muttered to his boat. "Let's get home." The storm intensified as Jack navigated through the turbulent waters. Waves crashed over the bow, soaking him to the skin. The wind howled, drowning out the sound of the engine and filling the air with stinging spray. For a moment, Jack felt a familiar fear creeping in, not of sharks this time, but of the sheer power of the ocean itself. He'd weathered storms before, but this one seemed particularly fierce, as if the sea was testing him, challenging his resolve to return to its embrace. But along with the fear came a surge of adrenaline, a reminder of why he'd fallen in love with this life in the first place. There was a primal thrill in facing the elements, in pitting his skill and experience against the raw power of nature. As he fought to keep the Sea Whisper on course, Jack found himself grinning despite the danger. This was what it meant to be a fisherman, not just reaping the ocean's bounty, but respecting its might, understanding its moods, and always remaining humble in the face of its vastness. After what seemed like hours, but was likely only 45 minutes, Jack began to make out the faint lights of the San Diego coastline through the rain. Relief flooded through him as he guided the Sea Whisper towards the safety of the harbor. As he approached the breakwater, the storm began to abate. The rain lessened to a drizzle and the wind died down to a stiff breeze. By the time Jack maneuvered his boat into its berth, the clouds were already beginning to break up, revealing patches of blue sky. Exhausted but exhilarated, Jack secured the Sea Whisper and began to unload his catch. He was soaked to the bone and knew he'd be feeling the effects of his battle with the storm for days to come, but he felt more alive than he had in months. As he worked, he heard rapid footsteps on the dock. Looking up, he saw Maria running towards him, her face a mask of worry. "Jack," she called out as she reached him. "Are you all right? When that storm hit, I was so worried." He pulled her into a hug, not caring that he was soaking her clothes. "I'm fine, love, more than fine, actually." Maria pulled back, studying his face. What she saw there, the sparkle in his eyes, the flush in his cheeks, made her smile despite her lingering concern. "You look happy," she said, a note of surprise in her voice. Jack nodded, glancing out at the now calm harbor. "I am," he said softly. I think I finally found my way back." As they walked home together, Jack's arm around Maria's waist, he felt a profound sense of peace. The sea, with all its beauty and danger, its calm days and its raging storms, was an integral part of who he was. He had faced his fears, weathered the literal and metaphorical storms, and come out stronger on the other side. Jack Henderson, fisherman and survivor, was truly home at last. The weeks following Jack's solo voyage and his battle with the unexpected storm saw a renewed vigor in the seasoned fisherman. His confidence, once shaken by the Mako encounter, had been tempered and strengthened. By facing the fury of the sea, Jack found himself eagerly anticipating each trip out on the Sea Whisper, his love for the ocean and his chosen profession rekindled. One crisp morning in late autumn, Jack was preparing for another day at sea when he noticed an unfamiliar face on the docks. A young man, barely out of his teens, was struggling to untangle a mass of fishing nets. Jack paused in his preparations, watching the youth's frustrated attempts for a moment before approaching. "Need a hand there, son?" Jack called out, his weathered face creasing into a friendly smile. The young man looked up, relief evident in his eyes. "Yes, sir. I'd really appreciate it. These nets have got the better of me, I'm afraid." Jack chuckled, kneeling down beside the tangled mess. His calloused hands moved with practiced ease, teasing apart the knots and straightening the lines. "What's your name, boy?" "Tommy, sir." "Tommy Reeves," the young man replied, watching Jack's movements intently. "Well, Tommy, first lesson of fishing. Your nets are your lifeline out there. Treat 'em with respect and they'll never let you down." Jack's fingers worked quickly, and within minutes the nets were neatly arranged and ready for use. Tommy's eyes widened in amazement. "That's incredible, sir. I've been at it for an hour and you fixed it in minutes." Jack stood, brushing off his hands. "Years of practice, son. You'll get there. You new to fishing?" Tommy nodded, a mix of excitement and nervousness in his voice. "Yes, sir, just started last week. My uncle got me a job on one of the commercial boats, but I'm still learning the ropes." Jack studied the young man for a moment, seeing in him the same eagerness and passion he'd felt in his own youth. "Tell you what, Tommy, how'd you like to come out with me today? I could use an extra pair of hands, and I might be able to teach you a thing or two." Tommy's face lit up with enthusiasm. "Really? That would be amazing, Mr. Henderson. Jack Henderson. But just call me Jack," he said, extending his hand. As they loaded supplies onto the Sea Whisper, Jack found himself energized by Tommy's youthful excitement. It had been years since he'd taken anyone under his wing, and he realized how much he'd missed the opportunity to pass on his knowledge. Once they were out on the open water, Jack began to explain the intricacies of his craft to Tommy. He showed him how to read the sea, pointing out subtle changes in the water's color and movement that indicated good fishing spots. See that darker patch over there? Jack said, gesturing to a spot about 50 yards from the boat. That's where we want to cast. The change in color means there's a school of fish just below the surface. Tommy leaned over the railing, squinting at the water. I think I see it, but how can you be sure? Jack smiled, remembering asking his own father the same question decades ago. Years of observation, Tommy. The sea speaks to those who learn to listen. Now, watch closely. With a practiced motion, Jack cast his line into the darker patch of water. Within moments, he felt a strong tug. See that? Now it's your turn. Tommy took the rod, his hands shaking slightly with excitement. Under Jack's patient guidance, he cast his line. The wait seemed interminable to the young man, but Jack stood calmly beside him, a knowing smile on his face. Suddenly, Tommy's line went taut. "I've got something," he exclaimed, his voice filled with a mixture of excitement and panic. "Easy now," Jack coached. "Don't try to force it, let the fish tire itself out a bit." Tommy nodded, his face a mask of concentration as he followed Jack's instructions. After a few minutes of struggle, he managed to reel in a sizable cod. "Well done, lad," Jack beamed, clapping Tommy on the back. "That's a fine catch for your first time out." As the day progressed, Jack found himself sharing not just fishing techniques but stories of his life at sea. He told Tommy about the storms he'd weathered, the record catches he'd made, and even after some hesitation about his encounter with the Mako shark. Tommy listened with rapt attention, his eyes wide with a mixture of awe and concern. "Weren't you scared to come back out after that?" he asked when Jack finished recounting the shark incident. Jack nodded, his hand unconsciously moving to touch the shark tooth hanging around his neck. "Terrified," he admitted. "For a while I thought I might never set foot on a boat again, but the sea, it's in my blood. I realized that the fear of never coming back was greater than any fear the ocean could throw at me." Tommy was quiet for a moment, processing Jack's words. "I think I understand," he said slowly. "It's not just a job for you, is it? It's a way of life?" Jack smiled, feeling a surge of affection for this perceptive young man. "That's exactly right, Tommy. It's not always easy, and it's certainly not always safe. But there's nothing else in this world I'd rather do." As the sun began to dip towards the horizon, Jack steered the Sea Whisper back towards the harbor. The day's catch had been good, and he felt a deep sense of satisfaction not just from the full hold, but from the knowledge he'd passed on. Tommy helped Jack unload the catch, his movements more confident now after a day of practical experience. As they finished up, the young man turned to Jack, his expression earnest. "Mr. Henderson, Jack, I can't thank you enough for today. I've learned more in these few hours than I have in the past week." Jack felt a warmth in his chest that had nothing to do with the physical labor of unloading the boat. "You're welcome, Tommy. You've got good instincts. Stick with it and you'll make a fine fisherman." As Tommy turned to leave, Jack called out to him. "Say, Tommy, I could use some regular help on the Sea Whisper. If you're interested in learning more, you're welcome to come out with me again." The young man's face lit up with a grin that reminded Jack of his own youth. "Really? That would be incredible. Thank you, sir." Watching Tommy practically skip down the dock, Jack felt a renewed sense of purpose. He'd always loved the sea, always. Found fulfillment in the challenge and beauty of a fisherman's life. But now he realized he had the opportunity to ensure that this way of life, this deep connection to the ocean, would continue with the next generation. As he secured the Sea Whisper for the night, Jack looked out at the darkening horizon. The sea stretched endlessly before him, as it always had. But now, instead of seeing only the dangers it held, he saw the possibilities. The chance to teach, to guide, to pass on the wisdom he'd gained through years of triumph and tragedy on these waters. Jack Henderson, fisherman and now mentor, felt a profound sense of contentment wash over him. He had faced his fears, rediscovered his passion, and now found a new purpose. As he walked home, the salt air filling his lungs and the gentle lapping of waves in his ears, he knew that his journey, like the sea itself, was far from over. There would be more storms to weather, more challenges to face. But with each wave, each sunrise, each lesson shared, he was writing a new chapter in his lifelong love affair with the ocean. Over the next few weeks, Jack and Tommy fell into a comfortable routine. The young man proved to be an eager learner, soaking up Jack's knowledge like a sponge. Their days on the Sea Whisper were filled with the rhythms of fishing, punctuated by Jack's stories and Tommy's endless questions. One morning, as they were preparing to head out, Jack noticed Tommy seemed distracted. The usually chatty young man was uncharacteristically quiet as they loaded supplies onto the boat. "Everything all right, Tommy?" Jack asked, concern evident in his voice. Tommy hesitated for a moment before responding. "Jack, I need to ask you something important." Jack nodded, giving the young man his full attention. "Go on, son, what's on your mind?" Tommy took a deep breath. "My uncle's offered me a full-time position on his commercial fishing boat. It's good money, and I'd be working with family, but, Jack prompted gently. "But I've learned so much from you, Jack. I feel like there's still so much more to learn. And honestly, I prefer this, just the two of us on the Sea Whisper. It feels more real, somehow." Jack felt a mix of emotions at Tommy's words. Pride, affection, and a touch of sadness. He'd grown fond of the young man, and the thought of their partnership ending so soon was unexpectedly painful. "That's a big decision, Tommy," Jack said carefully. "A commercial operation would certainly offer more stability and probably better pay." Tommy nodded, his face clouded with indecision. "I know, but when I'm out here with you, Jack, I feel like I'm not just learning a job, I'm learning a way of life." Jack smiled, touched by the young man's words. "Tell you what," he said, "let's head out and we can talk more on the water. Sometimes the sea has a way of clearing your head." As they sailed out of the harbor, the familiar sense of peace settled over Jack. He glanced at Tommy, seeing the same contentment reflected on the young man's face. They worked in companionable silence for a while, casting nets and checking lines. The day was clear, the sea calm, and their catch was looking promising. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, Jack decided it was time to address the elephant in the room. "Tommy," he began, "I want you to know that whatever you decide, I'm proud of you. You've come a long way in a short time." Tommy looked up from the net he was mending, his eyes bright with emotion. "Thanks, Jack. That means a lot coming from you." Jack leaned against the railing, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "You know, when I was about your age, I faced a similar decision. My father wanted me to join him on a big commercial trawler, said it was time I started thinking about my future, about financial security." Tommy listened intently, his hands stilling on the net. "What did you do?" Jack chuckled. "I was young and stubborn. Told him I'd rather fish from a rowboat than join some big operation where I'd just be another cog in the machine." "And he was okay with that?" Tommy asked, surprise evident in his voice. "Not at first," Jack admitted. "We had some pretty heated arguments. But eventually he came to understand that for me, fishing wasn't just about making money. It was about connection, to the sea, to the craft, to the rhythms of nature." Tommy nodded slowly. "That's how I feel when I'm out here with you, Jack, like I'm part of something bigger than just a job." Jack turned to face the young man, his expression serious. "It's not an easy life, Tommy. There'll be days when the sea seems to be fighting you every step of the way. Days when you'll wonder if you made the right choice. But if it's in your blood, if you feel that pull to the water in your very bones, then there's no other life that'll ever truly satisfy you." As if to punctuate Jack's words, a sudden gust of wind whipped across the deck, causing the Sea Whisper to rock gently. Tommy steadied himself, his face thoughtful. "I think I understand, Jack, but can I really make a living this way? I mean, you do all right, but you've been at this for years." Jack nodded, acknowledging the valid concern. "It's a fair question, Tommy. The truth is, it won't be easy. You'll have to work hard, be smart with your money, and always be ready to adapt. The sea isn't always generous, and you'll have lean times along with the good." He paused, looking out at the water. "But let me ask you this. When you imagine your future, what do you see? Are you happiest on a big commercial vessel, pulling in massive hauls? Or are you out here, on a boat like the Sea Whisper, feeling the spray on your face and knowing that every fish you catch is the result of your own skill and effort?" Tommy was quiet for a long moment, his gaze following Jack's out to sea. "When," he finally spoke, his voice was soft but determined, "I see this, Jack. I see mornings like today, heading out as the sun rises. I see learning to read the water, to understand the patterns of the fish and the moods of the ocean. I see a life. That's challenging, sometimes frustrating, but always rewarding. Jack felt a surge of pride and affection for the young man. Then I think you have your answer, son. Tommy nodded, a smile spreading across his face. I think I do. I'll tell my uncle thank you, but this is where I belong. Just then, one of the lines went taut, the rod bending sharply. Looks like we've got a big one, Jack called out. Want to do the honors? Tommy grabbed the rod, bracing himself against the boat's railing. The fish on the other end was putting up a tremendous fight, and Tommy strained with the effort of reeling it in. Easy now, Jack coached. Don't force it. Let it tire itself. Out. For several minutes, Tommy battled with the unseen fish, alternating between reeling and allowing the line to run out. Jack watched with approval, noting how the young man applied the techniques he'd been taught. Finally, with a last mighty heave, Tommy pulled his catch over the side of the boat. A massive tuna flopped on the deck, its scales gleaming in the sunlight. Wood. You look at that, Jack exclaimed, his voice filled with excitement. That's got to be at least 100 pounds. Well done, Tommy. Tommy stood over his catch, panting from the exertion but grinning from ear to ear. I couldn't have done it without your teaching, Jack. As they secured the tuna and prepared to head back to harbor with their impressive catch, Jack felt a deep sense of satisfaction. He saw in Tommy not just a protege, but the future of the kind of fishing he'd dedicated his life to. Fishing that respected the sea, that valued quality over quantity, that maintained a deep connection to the natural world. You know, Tommy, Jack said as they neared the coast, the lights of San Diego twinkling in the distance, I've been thinking, how would you feel about becoming partners? Not right away, mind you. You've still got a lot to learn. But in time, I could see us running the Sea Whisper together, maybe even adding another boat down the line. Tommy's eyes widened in surprise and joy. Partners? Jack, that would be amazing. Are you sure? Jack nodded, his decision feeling more right with each passing moment. I'm sure. You've got the passion, the skill, and the respect for the sea that it takes to make it in this life. And I'll tell you something else. Having you out here these past weeks has reminded me why I fell in love with this job in the first place. It'd be an honor to have you as a partner. As they docked the Sea Whisper, their holds full and their spirits high, Jack knew that this was more than just the end of a successful fishing trip. It was the beginning of a new chapter. For Tommy, for himself, and for the Sea Whisper. The sun was setting as they finished unloading their catch, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. Jack looked out at the ocean, then at the young man beside him, and felt a profound sense of continuity. The sea had been his life, and now he had the chance to pass that life on to the next generation. What do you say we celebrate our new partnership? Jack suggested. I know a great little seafood place just up the coast. Best grilled tuna you've ever tasted. Tommy grinned, slapping Jack on the back. Sounds perfect, partner. As they walked off the dock together, Jack felt a renewed sense of purpose. The sea had tested him, nearly broken him, but in the end it had given him this. A chance to share his passion, to mentor a promising young fisherman, and to ensure that the traditions and values he held dear would live on. The story of Jack, Henderson, fisherman and survivor, was far from over. Instead, it was intertwining with a new story, that of Tommy Reeves, his protege and future partner. Together, they would face whatever challenges the sea might bring, bound by their shared love for the ocean and the timeless craft of fishing. The partnership between Jack Henderson and Tommy Reeves blossomed over the following months. As winter gave way to spring, the Sea Whisper became a familiar sight in the waters off San Diego, with the seasoned fisherman and his young protege working side by side. One crisp morning in early March, Jack and Tommy were preparing for what seemed like a routine day at sea. The weather forecast promised clear skies and calm waters, perfect conditions for fishing. As they loaded their gear onto the boat, Jack noticed a group of marine biologists setting up equipment on a nearby dock. Curiosity piqued, Jack approached. One of the scientists, a woman in her mid-30s with short auburn hair. "Morning," he called out. "Mind if I ask what brings you folks out here today?" The woman looked up from her clipboard, offering a friendly smile. "Good morning, I'm Dr. Sarah Collins from the Scripps Institution of Oceanography. We're conducting a study on local marine life populations, particularly focusing on the impact of changing ocean temperatures. Jack nodded, his interest growing. Sounds important work. I'm Jack Henderson. Been fishing these waters for over 30 years now. This here's my partner, Tommy Reeves, he said, gesturing to the young man who had joined them. Dr. Collins's eyes lit up. Mr. Henderson, it's a pleasure to meet you. Your experience could be invaluable to our research. Would you mind if I asked you a few questions about the fish populations you've observed over the years? Jack glanced at Tommy, who nodded encouragingly. We've got some time before we need to head out, Tommy said. I can finish loading up. As Tommy went back to work, Jack spent the next 20 minutes sharing his observations with Dr. Collins. He spoke of the changes he'd noticed in fish migration patterns, the species that seemed to be growing more abundant, and those that were becoming rarer. You know, Jack mused, I've been noticing more tropical species in these waters lately, fish that I used to only see much further south. Dr. Collins nodded, scribbling notes furiously. That aligns with our data on rising ocean temperatures. Mr. Henderson, your insights are incredibly helpful. Would you and your partner be willing to assist us further? We're looking for local fishermen to help with our data collection. Jack stroked his chin thoughtfully. What exactly would that involve, Doc? Nothing too complicated, Dr. Collins assured him. We'd provide you with some basic equipment to record water temperatures and take samples. We'd also ask you to keep detailed logs of your catches, species, sizes, locations. It would be a great help to our research, and we'd compensate you for your time and effort. Jack looked over at Tommy, who had rejoined them. The young man's eyes were shining with excitement. What do you think, Tommy? Feel like becoming amateur marine biologists? Tommy grinned. Sounds fascinating, Jack. Could be a great opportunity to learn more about the waters we fish. Jack turned back to Dr. Collins. All right, Doc, count us in. We'll do what we can to help. After exchanging contact information and agreeing to meet later in the week for training, Jack and Tommy set out on the Sea Whisper. As they cleared the harbor, Jack could sense Tommy's excitement. This could be a real game changer for us, Jack, Tommy said, his voice filled with enthusiasm. Think about it. If we understand more about the changing patterns in the ocean, we could adapt our fishing methods. Stay ahead of the curve, you know. Jack nodded, a small smile playing on his lips. You're right, Tommy, it's a different world from when I started fishing. Back then, we relied solely on experience and gut instinct. Now, with all this scientific data, well, it's a whole new ballgame. As they reached their usual fishing grounds, Jack and Tommy fell into their familiar routine. They cast their nets, checked their lines, and waited patiently for the fish to bite. But today, there was an added layer of awareness. They found themselves paying closer attention to the water temperature, noting the species they caught with greater detail. Around midday, as they were hauling in a particularly good catch, Tommy spotted something in the water. "Jack, look over there," he called out, pointing to a spot about 50 yards from the boat. Jack squinted in the direction Tommy was pointing. At first, he saw nothing but the glittering surface of the sea. Then, suddenly a large dark shape broke the surface. "Well, I'll be damned," Jack muttered. "That's a whale shark." Tommy's eyes widened in awe. "A whale shark? Here? I thought they were usually found in much warmer waters." Jack nodded, his expression a mixture of wonder and concern. "They are. I've never seen one this far north before." He watched as the gentle giant glided gracefully through the water, its spotted back occasionally breaking the surface. "This is exactly the kind of thing Dr. Collins was talking about," Tommy said. "The changing ocean temperatures are bringing new species to these waters." As they watched the whale shark, Jack felt a familiar prickle of unease. He unconsciously touched the shark tooth hanging around his neck, a reminder of his harrowing encounter with the Mako shark months ago. But this was different. The whale shark, despite its enormous size, was known to be harmless to humans, feeding primarily on plankton and small fish. "Should we report this to Dr. Collins?" Tommy asked, still watching the massive fish in awe. Jack nodded. "Definitely. This is exactly the kind of observation they're interested in. But first, let's get a bit closer. Carefully, mind you, we don't want to disturb it." Slowly, Jack maneuvered the Sea Whisper closer to the whale shark. As they drew near, they could see the intricate pattern of spots and stripes on its back. its wide mouth open as it filter-fed on the rich ocean waters. "It's beautiful," Tommy breathed, leaning over the railing for a better look. Jack had to agree. In all his years at sea, he'd seen countless wonders, but this was something special. It was a stark reminder of the ocean's capacity for surprise, even after all these years. As they drifted alongside the massive creature, Jack felt a profound sense of humility wash over him. Here was a being that dwarfed their boat, that had likely traversed thousands of miles of ocean, guided by instincts and patterns that humans were only beginning to understand. "You know, Tommy," Jack said softly, "moments like this is why I could never give up this life. All the hard work, all the dangers. It's worth it for experiences like this." Tommy nodded, his eyes never leaving the whale shark. "I get it, Jack, I really do." They stayed with the whale shark for nearly an hour, observing its behavior and taking notes as best they could. When it finally dove deep, disappearing from view, both men felt as though they were coming out of a trance. "Well," Jack said, clapping Tommy on the shoulder, "I'd say that's enough excitement for one day. What do you say we head back and give Dr. Collins a call? I have a feeling she's going to be very interested in our whale shark friend." As they turned the Sea Whisper back toward San Diego, Jack felt a renewed sense of purpose. The ocean, it seemed, was changing, but instead of fearing that change, he now saw an opportunity, a chance to learn, to adapt, and to play a part in understanding these shifting patterns. The sun was low on the horizon by the time they docked. As they unloaded their catch, which despite the whale shark excitement had been quite good, Jack saw Dr. Collins and her team packing up their equipment. "Dr. Collins," he called out, "you're not going to believe what we saw today." As they recounted their whale shark encounter, Dr. Ike Collins's excitement was palpable. She peppered them with questions about the shark's size, behavior, and exact location. "This is incredible data, gentlemen," she said when they'd finished. "Whale shark sightings this far north are extremely rare. Your observation could be crucial in understanding how climate change is affecting marine migration patterns." As they parted ways with Dr. Collins, promising to start their official data collection on their next outing, Tommy turned to Jack with a grin. "You know, when I decided to become a fisherman, I never imagined I'd be contributing to scientific research." Jack laughed, slapping the young man on the back. "That's the beauty of this life, Tommy. Every day brings something new. The sea never stops teaching us, if we're willing to learn." As they walked off the dock together, the lights of San Diego twinkling to life in the gathering dusk, Jack felt a deep sense of satisfaction. The day had been a powerful reminder of why he'd fallen in love with the sea in the first place, its mystery, its beauty, and its endless capacity for surprise. He glanced at Tommy, seeing the same wonder and excitement in the young man's eyes that he'd felt at his age. Together, they were not just fishing partners, but stewards of the ocean, playing their small part in understanding and protecting the waters that had given them so much. As they parted ways for the evening, Jack knew that tomorrow would bring new challenges, new discoveries. But with Tommy by his side and the vast, ever-changing ocean before them, he was ready for whatever adventures lay ahead. As spring turned to summer, Jack and Tommy fell into a new rhythm, balancing their fishing duties with their newfound role as citizen scientists. Each day on the water brought not only the familiar challenge of securing a good catch, but also the excitement of gathering data for Dr. Collins and her team at the Scripps Institution of Oceanography. One sweltering July morning, Jack and Tommy set out on the Sea Whisper, just as the sun was peeking over the horizon. The air was thick with humidity, promising another scorching day. "Looks like it's going to be a hot one," Tommy remarked, wiping sweat from his brow as they cleared the harbor. Jack nodded, his eyes scanning the horizon. "Aye, that it does. We'll need to keep a close eye on our catch today. This heat can spoil the fish faster than you can blink." As they reached their usual fishing grounds, Jack noticed something odd about the water. There was a strange, reddish-brown tinge to it that he'd never seen before. "Tommy," he called out, "take a look at this. What do you make of it?" Tommy leaned over the side of the boat, his brow furrowed in concentration. "It's like the water's, rusty. I've never seen anything like it." Jack shook his head, a sense of unease growing in his gut. "Me neither, and I've been fishing these waters for decades. He reached for the water testing kit Dr. Collins had provided them. "Let's take some samples. This is definitely something the doc will want to know about." As they collected water, samples and recorded their observations, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. The usual sounds of seabirds were noticeably absent, and they hadn't seen a single fish jump or break the surface. "Jack," Tommy called out, his voice tight with concern. "Look at this." Jack turned to see Tommy pulling in one of their lines. At the end of it was a fish, but not the healthy specimen they were used to catching. This fish was clearly distressed, its movements sluggish and erratic. "What in the world?" Jack muttered, examining the fish closely. Its gills were coated with a strange, slimy substance, and its eyes were clouded over. "Should we call Dr. Collins?" Tommy asked, his voice filled with worry. Jack nodded grimly. "Yeah, I think we'd better. This isn't natural, and I've got a bad feeling about it." As Tommy made the call, Jack continued to observe the water around them. The reddish tinge seemed to be spreading, and he could see debris floating on the surface, bits of dead fish and other marine life. Dr. Collins answered on the third ring, her voice thick with sleep. "Dr. Collins speaking." "Doc, it's Jack Henderson," Tommy said quickly. "We're out on the water and something's very wrong. The water's got this weird color and the fish, they're not right." There was a pause, and when Dr. Collins spoke again, all traces of sleep were gone from her voice. "Can you describe the water color? Is it reddish-brown?" "Yeah, that's exactly it," Tommy confirmed. "Oh no," Dr. Collins breathed. "I was afraid." "Save this. Jack, Tommy, listen to me carefully. What you're seeing is likely a red tide, a harmful algal bloom. It can be extremely dangerous to marine life and potentially to humans as well. I need you to collect as many samples as you can, but do not, under any circumstances, come into direct contact with the water." Jack, who had been listening in, felt his heart sink. He'd heard of red tides before, but had never experienced one firsthand. "Doc, what about the fish? Is it safe to catch anything?" "Absolutely not," Dr. Collins replied firmly. "Any fish caught in these waters could be contaminated. Jack, I hate to say this, but you need to head back to shore immediately." This situation could escalate quickly. As they prepared to return to harbor, Jack and Tommy worked quickly to collect more water samples and document their observations. The reddish tinge in the water was becoming more pronounced, and the smell of decay was beginning to fill the air. "I can't believe this," Tommy said, his voice filled with a mixture of awe and horror. "It's like the whole ocean is dying around us." Jack nodded grimly. "Nature can be cruel sometimes, Tommy. But remember, the ocean is resilient. It's faced challenges before and always bounces back." As they neared the coast, they could see a flurry of activity on the shore. News of the red tide had clearly spread, and environmental teams were setting up equipment and cordoning off areas of the beach. Dr. Collins was waiting for them at the dock, her face etched with concern. As soon as the Sea Whisper was secured, she approached, careful not to touch anything on the boat. "Jack, Tommy, thank you for your quick action," she said. "The samples and data you've collected will be invaluable in our efforts to understand and mitigate this bloom." Jack handed over the samples, his expression grim. "Doc, in all my years on these waters, I've never seen anything like this." "How bad?" "Is it?" Dr. Collins sighed, running a hand through her hair. "It's not good, Jack. This bloom is one of the largest and most intense we've ever recorded in this area. The combination of warming waters and increased nutrient runoff from the land has created perfect conditions for these algae to thrive." Tommy, who had been listening intently, spoke up. "What does this mean for the fish, for our livelihood?" Dr. Collins's expression softened with sympathy. "I won't sugarcoat it. This bloom will have a significant impact on local marine life. Many fish and other sea creatures will die. As for fishing, I'm afraid the waters will be off limits until we can confirm they're safe again." Jack felt as if he'd been punched in the gut. The sea, which had always been his provider, his way of life, was now toxic and forbidden. He looked at Tommy, seeing his own shock and dismay mirrored in the young man's eyes. "How long?" Jack asked, his voice hoarse. "How long before we can go back out?" Dr. Collins shook her head. "It's hard to say. These blooms can last anywhere from a few days to several months. We'll be monitoring the situation closely. But for now, all we can do is wait and hope for the best." As the reality of the situation sank in, Jack felt a wave of helplessness wash over him. The ocean, which had been his home for so long, was now in crisis, and there was nothing he could do but stand by and watch. Over the next few weeks, Jack and Tommy found themselves in uncharted waters. Unable to fish, they instead threw themselves into assisting Dr. Collins and her team. They helped collect samples, provided local knowledge to the researchers, and even participated in community outreach programs to educate the public about the red tide. One evening, as they sat on the deck of the Sea Whisper, now docked indefinitely, Tommy turned to Jack with a worried expression. "Jack, what if we can't go back? What if the ocean never recovers?" Jack was quiet for a long moment, his eyes fixed on the horizon where the sun was setting in a blaze of red and gold. Finally he spoke, his voice low but firm. "Tommy, let me tell you something about the sea. It's faced worse than this and come back stronger. Overfishing, pollution, you name it. The ocean always finds a way to heal itself. Our job now is to help it along as best we can." Tommy nodded, slowly, some of the worry leaving his face. "You're right. And hey, at least we're learning a lot from Dr. Collins and her team. Maybe this will help us be better fishermen in the long run." Jack smiled, clapping Tommy on the shoulder. "That's the spirit, lad. We're not just fishermen anymore. We're guardians of the sea, and when this is over, we'll go back out there with a deeper understanding of the waters we depend on." As the weeks turned into months, Jack and Tommy continued to work closely with the Scripps research team. They watched anxiously as the red tide slowly began to dissipate, and signs of life returned to the waters. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Dr. Collins gave them the news they'd been waiting for. "The water samples are coming back clean," she told them, a smile breaking across her face. "It's not over yet, but we're seeing significant improvement. I think it's safe for you to start fishing again, as long as you continue to monitor and report any unusual observations." The day they took the Sea Whisper out again was one Jack would never forget. As they cleared the harbor, the familiar sense of freedom and possibility washed over him. The sea stretched out before them, blue and inviting once more. "Well, Tommy," Jack said, his hand steady on the wheel, "ready to see what the old girl has in store for us today?" Tommy grinned, his eyes shining with excitement. "More than ready, Jack. Let's go find some fish." As they moved further out to sea, Jack felt a profound sense of gratitude. The ocean had faced a crisis and emerged resilient, and he and Tommy had emerged changed as well, no longer just fishermen, but stewards of the sea, more aware than ever of the delicate balance that governed life beneath the waves. The Sea Whisper cut through the water, carrying them towards new adventures and challenges. Jack knew that whatever lay ahead, they would face it with newfound knowledge and respect for the vast, mysterious ocean that had shaped their lives. The autumn air carried a crisp chill as Jack and Tommy prepared. The Sea Whisper for what would be their final fishing trip of the season. The past year had been a roller coaster of experiences, from the terrifying encounter with the Mako shark to the devastating red tide that had kept them shorebound for months. Now, with winter approaching, they were eager to make the most of the last few days of good weather. As they loaded their gear onto the boat, Jack noticed Tommy seemed preoccupied, his usual chatter replaced by a pensive silence. "Everything all right, lad?" Jack asked, concern evident in his voice. Tommy looked up, startled out of his thoughts. "Oh yeah, just thinking, I guess. It's been quite a year, hasn't it?" Jack nodded, a wry smile crossing his weathered face. "That it has, Tommy. That it has." As they cast off and headed out of the harbor, the familiar rhythm of the sea beneath them brought a sense of calm. The coastline of San Diego receded behind them, the city's lights twinkling in the pre-dawn darkness. They had been at sea for a few hours, the sun now high in the sky, when Tommy finally broke his unusual silence. "Jack," he began, his voice hesitant, "I've been thinking a lot about everything that's happened. The shark attack, the red tide, all the work we've done with Dr. Collins." Jack looked at his young partner, sensing there was more to come. "Go on," he encouraged gently. Tommy took a deep breath. I think I want to go back to school, to study marine biology." For a moment, Jack was stunned into silence. He had grown to think of Tommy as not just a partner, but as the future of their small fishing operation. The idea that the young man might be considering a different path had never crossed his mind. Seeing Jack's surprise, Tommy hurried on. "I love fishing, Jack. I really do. And everything you've taught me, it's been incredible. But working with Dr. Collins, seeing how our knowledge as fishermen could contribute to scientific research, it made me realize there's so much more I want to learn about the ocean." Jack leaned against the railing, his eyes scanning the horizon as he processed Tommy's words. Part of him wanted to argue, to convince Tommy to stay. But as he looked at the young man's earnest face, he realized that would be selfish. "Tommy," Jack said finally, his voice gruff with emotion, "I'd be lying if I said I wasn't disappointed. I've come to think of you as more than just a fishing partner. In many ways, you're the son I never had." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "But I'd be even more disappointed in myself if I stood in the way of your dreams." Relief washed over Tommy's face. "Really? You're not mad?" Jack chuckled, shaking his head. "Mad? No, lad, proud. I'm damn proud of you. It takes courage to change course, to pursue something new." As they continued to work, checking their lines and nets, Jack found himself reminiscing about his own youth, the choices he'd made that had led him to this life on the sea. "You know," he said, "when I was about your age, I had a chance to go to college. My high school teacher thought I had a knack for writing, wanted me to study literature." Tommy looked surprised. "I didn't know that. Why didn't you go?" Jack shrugged. "The sea was in my blood. I couldn't imagine doing anything else, but sometimes on stormy nights when the fish aren't biting, I wonder what might have been." They worked in companionable silence for a while, each lost in their own thoughts. The day was proving to be a good one for fishing, their hold slowly filling with a respectable catch. As the sun began to dip towards the horizon, painting the sky in vibrant oranges and pinks, Jack spotted something in the distance. "Tommy," he called out, pointing, "look over there." Tommy squinted in the direction Jack was indicating. At first he saw nothing but the endless expanse of sea and sky. Then, suddenly, a spout of water erupted from the surface, followed by the graceful arc of a whale's back. "Whales!" Tommy exclaimed, his face lighting up with excitement. "A whole pod of them." Indeed, as they watched, more whales surfaced, their massive bodies gleaming in the fading sunlight. It was a breathtaking sight, one that never failed to fill Jack with a sense of wonder, no matter how many times he'd seen it. "Grey whales," Jack said, his voice soft with awe. "They're starting their migration south for the winter." Tommy was transfixed, his eyes wide as he took in the majestic scene. "It's incredible," he breathed. "They'll travel thousands of miles, all the way to Baja California." Jack nodded, a small smile playing on his lips. "You know, Tommy, I think you're going to make one hell of a marine biologist." As they watched the whales, Jack felt a profound sense of rightness settle over him. Yes, he would miss having Tommy as his partner. But seeing the young man's passion for the ocean, his eagerness to learn and understand, Jack knew this was the right path. "Tommy," Jack said, turning to face his young friend, "I want you to know that I'll support you in this. Whatever you need, whether it's help with applications, or a place to stay during breaks, or just someone to talk to when the studying gets tough, I'm here for you." Tommy's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "Thanks, Jack. That means more to me than you know." As the last light faded from the sky and the stars began to twinkle overhead, Jack and Tommy began to prepare for the journey back to shore. It had been a good day, a good catch, a magnificent whale sighting, and a heart-to-heart that had cemented their bond beyond that of mere fishing partners. As they neared the harbor, the lights of San Diego growing ever closer, Jack found himself reflecting on the journey that had brought them to this point. From that terrifying day, when he'd nearly lost his life to a Mako shark, through the months of recovery and doubt, to finding new purpose in mentoring Tommy and contributing to marine research. "You know, Tommy," Jack said as they maneuvered the Sea Whisper into her berth, "life has a funny way of working out. A year ago, I thought my time on the sea might be over. Now, here I am, not just back on the water, but helping to shape the future of ocean research through you." Tommy smiled as he secured the mooring lines. "I couldn't have done it without you, Jack. Everything I've learned from you, every experience we've shared, it's all part of what's driving me forward." As they unloaded their catch and prepared to call it a day, Jack felt a mix of emotions wash over him. There was pride in Tommy's decision, excitement for the young man's future, and yes, a touch of sadness at the thought of no longer having him as a daily presence on the Sea Whisper. But most of all, there was a sense of continuity, of passing on a legacy. Tommy might not be following directly in his footsteps as a fisherman, but he was carrying forward Jack's love for the sea, his respect for its power and beauty, and his desire to understand and protect it. As they walked off the dock together, the salt air crisp in their lungs and the sound of the waves a constant backdrop, Jack knew that this wasn't an ending, but a new beginning. For Tommy, a journey into the world of marine science awaited. And for Jack, there would be new challenges, new partnerships, and always, the call of the sea. "So," Jack said as they reached the parking lot, "what do you say we celebrate your decision? I know a great little seafood place just up the coast. We can toast to your future and to the adventures we've shared." Tommy grinned, slapping Jack on the back. "Sounds perfect, but Jack..." "Yeah? Promise me something. Promise me that even when I'm buried in textbooks and research papers, you'll still take me out fishing now and then. I don't ever want to lose touch with this life, with the practical side of things." Jack felt his heart swell with affection for the young man. "Count on it, Tommy. The Sea Whisper will always have a place for you." As they drove off into the night, Jack Henderson felt a profound sense of peace. The sea had given him so much over the years, a livelihood, a purpose, moments of terror, and of transcendent beauty. Now, through Tommy, it was giving him something new, the chance to see his life's work carried forward into the future, in ways he never could have imagined. The story of Jack Henderson, fisherman and survivor, was far from over. But now it was intertwined with a new story, one of discovery and scientific pursuit, and Jack couldn't wait to see how it would unfold.